So the last thing that we're going to do to finish up our game here is, of course, add in some sound effects and some background music. Right now we have a functional game, but audio is usually half of the experience. So definitely don't ignore how important that is, and take some time to really get perfect sounds and make sure that you have sounds applied to all the things that they need. So let's start off by importing our sounds. So we'll go over to our Sounds tab. Just click on that. And just like we've done with images, we'll click this little plus icon here at the bottom. And in our sounds folder, we're going to import all the shooter sounds. So this is going to be an explosion, a game over sound, a background music, and a shot. So let's drag and drop all of these. And we're going to click open. Now when you drag and select all of these at once and click open, you're going to get this dialog, which you want to pay attention to, because sometimes you're going to import a sound as a sound, and sometimes you're going to import a sound as music. And that's just kind of how GameSalad processes the file. So you want to pay attention to the names here. So we have a shooter explosion.aif, and that's going to be a sound, because that's essentially just a sound effect. And then we have a shooter game over, and that's also a sound effect, so we'll import as sound. And then we have shooter underscore music, and that is actually music. So it's telling you here anything that's longer than 30 seconds tends to be considered music. So we'll import that as music. And then we have the shot, which is, of course, a sound effect. And that's it. We have all of our sound effects inside here. And you can press this little play button to preview each one of the sounds. So here's our explosion, our game over, our background music, and then our shot. So the first thing we want to do is program the shot, so we can double click on our ship actor. And we've already set up a rule earlier that when we press the space bar, that's this third rule in here, that when we press the space bar, we're spawning the shot or the bullet. We also want to apply the shot sound. So all we need to do is drag and drop this into that same rule. So we don't have to set up a new rule. In other words, anytime the space bar is pressed, we are not only going to spawn this shot actor, but we're also going to play the shot sound. So let's go ahead and preview that, jump into our game scene, and press preview. And now when I press space bar, you can see that we have that sound effect. And already we've gone from a completely quiet game to something that has a lot more intensity. So next up, let's program in an explosion. And again, that'll also be here on our ship. So double clicking on the ship actor again. And let's pop down to this rule, which says when the ship overlaps and collides with the rock, what do we want to happen? Well, we already have the ship being destroyed and we have it spawning an explosion, but now we can also get it to play the explosion. So just as we did before, we'll go into our sounds here and just drag and drop that into this rule that we already set up. You can set up that rule all over again by creating a new rule and then doing the collision, but just to keep things tidy, that's why we want to keep adding it here. So let's preview that. We'll go back into our game scene, preview. We have our shot sound effect. And when our ship comes in contact, we get the explosion. Now you can apply the explosion to the rocks themselves. It's really up to you whether you want that sound effect to happen. If you want a very noisy game, when that sound effect happens on each one of these rocks, and that's pretty simple. We'll just double click on the rock, and you can see that the rock also has a rule that says when it overlaps and collides with the shot, we have all these things happening, and of course we can apply the explosion to that as well. So really it's up to you whether you want it in there or not. And then we have a game that sounds like this. When we get a lot of asteroids coming in, like we will here in a second, that might be just a little So it's really up to you whether you want to add that in. In this case, I'm just going to delete it. So just click on this X right here to remove that. And then now we just have the explosion happening on the ship. So what do we have next up? We have this background music. So this is a great thing to apply just to kind of just some inanimate actors in the scene. So we have this space background, which is our background that we see right here. So if we double click on this, you can see that there's no programming in here, but it is inside of our scene. So if we want to drag this shooter music and just drop it right in there, then we have it ready to go. And of course we don't want it to end, so we're going to loop that. And if we go back to our home screen and press preview, you can see we don't have any music going on here, but the minute we press play, you can see now we have that background music. And we have our shooting sound effect, and of course, our explosion. And then everything resets and goes back to the main screen. Now, one thing I'd like to point out, if you saw that these play buttons kind of flew left and right, this may be something that happens on yours. I'd like to point out GameSalad is a beta. So that means that they haven't quite worked out all the bugs yet, but I've noticed that this bug only exists inside the GameSalad simulator, but if you actually publish this, this bug doesn't show up anymore. So I'll just refresh this, and you can see that now everything happens exactly the way it needs to, but sometimes the play and option button, when you use the move to behavior, just kind of fly off into space like they did previously, and I don't want you to panic. That's just a small bug that you'll find inside GameSalad. And if you find any other bugs while working on these videos, don't panic. That's just kind of GameSalad working out the kinks, as they still are in beta, even though people have published a tremendous amount of games with GameSalad already. So now we have our background music, we have our explosion, and our bullets all set up. The last sound effect we can add is, of course, this kind of little game over sound effect. So I will just jump back into our actor list here and then double click on game over. And we can go to the game over sound effect, and we can just drag and drop that right in there. So the minute this game over actor is spawned, then we get it playing this game over sound. So we can preview this. So now not only do we get that explosion, but we get that simple game over. And again, we saw that silly bug happen. So again, don't worry about that bug. It is GameSalad just getting a little weird on you. Just go ahead and refresh, and you don't have to worry about it. So that's all the audio that we're going to be adding into the game. It's pretty simple to add in audio, whether it be music or sound effects. If you want, you can add in audio on your play buttons so that when people press them or tap them, you get a little bit of an audio effect happening as well. Experiment with having different types of music playing. Maybe you want one type of music here in the main menu, and then you want another type of music here in the actual game. So enjoy, make your own games with tons of exciting graphics and, of course, tons of exciting music. And if we go ahead and click on the play button, you can see that automatically takes us into our game. And we can switch back to the home. And the options button is really up to you. I just wanted to create the additional graphic. So in case you wanted to create a third scene, something with options or something with more games, you can use this button for pretty much anything that you want. So now that we've created a way to get from our home screen into our gameplay, let's figure out a way to kind of end our gameplay and then maybe get back to our home screen. So the way that we're going to do this is we'll switch back to our game scene here. And this is the one that we want to work on. And we want to set up some sort of game over, because right now if we preview this, you can see that the ship will essentially explode when it comes in contact with one of these asteroids, but then nothing else happens. We pretty much just sit here for infinity while our screen fills up with an endless amount of asteroids. So we want something to happen when our ship explodes. So let's back up a little bit. And let's bring in a game over graphic. So again, here in our images, I'm going to click this plus icon. And in our art folder, we have a game over PNG that we'll import. So open that up. And we're going to drag that up into our actors area. If I drag that into my scene really quickly, you can see this is what it looks like. Just a game over graphic with a little bit of transparency. So we're going to delete that because we don't want that in our scene. I just wanted to show you what that looked like. What we want is that to essentially show up when our ship explodes. So if we double click on our ship actor, you can see that earlier we created a rule that says this: when the ship overlaps and collides with a rock, which are our asteroids, then we want to destroy the ship and we want to spawn the explosion actor. So pretty simple stuff. Now we don't want to just spawn the explosion actor, but we want to spawn that game over actor that we just brought into our scene here. So what we can do is we can actually click on spawn actor and hold the Alt or Option key and click and drag to duplicate that. So now what happens is when our ship overlaps and collides with a rock, it will become destroyed and it will spawn the explosion actor, and we can actually switch this to spawn the game over actor as well. So let's preview this and see what happens. We'll switch back to our game scene, preview that. And when our ship comes in contact with a rock or an asteroid, we now spawn the game over image. Pretty simple stuff. Now there's a little bit of a problem here. So if I refresh this and I rotate my ship and shoot some of these guys, and then my ship comes in contact, you can see now the game over is set itself up in the orientation of where my ship was rotated, and that's obviously not what we want. So let's back up and let's take a look at a few of the settings here. Double click on the ship, and you can see that this game over actor is being spawned, but we have its direction set to the actor, and we have its position set to the actor. So essentially when it's spawned, it's paying attention to the position and the direction, or the kind of the rotation of where the actor is. We actually want to switch both of these from actor over to scene. So in other words, when this actor is spawned, the game over image, we don't want it to pay attention to the actor. We just want it to pay attention to the scene. So let's see what happens now if we go back into our game scene and then preview this. I'm rotating my ship, but now watch what happens when it explodes. We get that game over graphic, but it has nothing to do with the ship's position and it has nothing to do with the ship's rotation, except for it's showing up at 0, 0, which is not what we want either. So how do we get this to show up in the middle? Well, first we got to figure out where the middle of our scene is, and that can be a little bit confusing at times. But if we again look at our scene attributes up here in the inspector, and we look at our scene size, we can see that our scene is exactly 1024 by 768. So if this is 0, 0 down here, then I move up just a little bit and over a little bit, then that would be 1, 1. If I moved up and over, that'd be 2, 2, and 3, 3, 3, and so on and so forth, up until this corner, where that would be 1024 by 768. So what we need to do is get to that middle point, which would be half of 1024 and half of 768. So you can put something here in the middle and then double click on it and get that, but you wouldn't exactly get the right number. So all you need to do is divide your scene in half to figure out what the center value is. So if you take 1024 and divide that by 2, then you're going to get 512. So if we go back into our ship, we can set up this position to be 512. And if you take 768 and divide that by 2, you're going to get 384. And you can type in 384 for this position. And now if we preview this, let's see what happens. We'll rotate our actor a little bit, try to kill off a few asteroids, and then we get our game over showing up exactly in the center here, which are those coordinates that we put in there. So now we have a great game over, but we're still stuck in the same position where essentially we just have this endless scene going on forever. And what we want is either to set up a button, or in this case, just for it after a certain amount of time to automatically transition back to our home scene. And this is simple enough. We're going to click the back button. And what we want to do is double click on the game over actor. We want to give this some intelligence. So if we go into our behaviors, we can drag in a timer that says after, let's say, 3 seconds, what we want to do is change the scene. So we can change the scene back to the home screen, or we can do something else, which is just reset the whole game. And because our home screen is the very, very first scene, if we click over here, you can see home and then game. Resetting will just go back to the very first initial scene. So we'll go back to our game here, double click on the game over actor, and you can see after 3 seconds we'll just reset the whole game. So let's see what happens. Now the game over actor doesn't exist right now, so it's not resetting the whole thing. It only exists when it's spawned, which happens now on impact. So 3, 2, and then 1, and it should reset the whole game. And then we can press play, and then we're back into our scene here. And then 3, 2, 1, and then we're back into the home screen here. And now we have a fully functional game that we can play. Obviously, when we impact all of the asteroids, or impacted by one of the asteroids, our game is over. So now, with all of that knowledge that you've created or have learned so far, try to think about how you might create a win scenario. I obviously can take you through the same exact steps which we just did for the game over, but I want you to think of a way that you can create a win scenario and actually get back to the home screen. So kind of use the knowledge that you've learned of rules and behaviors and apply that to this game that you've created. So now not only are you going to create a win scenario, but maybe you also have a bright idea for that options button, something that you can do with your space scene here. Another thing that I'd like to challenge you to do at this point is right now you have 2 scenes. We have a game scene and a home. You can definitely create more of these so that you have different levels. So maybe that option button isn't an option button at all, but you might have different levels that you can choose from. So take everything that you've learned here and push yourself to create an even more complex game, but just based on the same rules and behaviors that you've learned so far.